If you want to know the secret to being truly wealthy, you shouldn't look at the size of someone's house. You should look at the luxury car they deliberately decided, not to buy.
Right, the invisible money.
Exactly.
Welcome to the debate. Today, we are completely bypassing the math of personal finance. We aren't talking about interest rates or stock portfolios or withdrawal strategies.
No spreadsheets today, thankfully.
Right, no spreadsheets. Instead, we're looking at the messy, profound, and honestly often hidden emotional forces that dictate our relationship with money. Because let's be real, our financial decisions are almost never driven by the cold logic of a calculator.
They're driven by our deepest psychology, our generational fears, and this really desperate search for identity and security. Yeah, precisely. So the central question we are exploring today is this. Does the deliberate accumulation of money fundamentally grant us freedom and emotional security? Or does it, inevitably trap us in a psychological cycle of social comparison, moving goalposts, and inherited anxieties?
It's a big question.
It is. And I will be taking the position that money, when viewed correctly as a reservoir of unspent options, is the ultimate tool for achieving personal autonomy and, peace of mind.
And I'll be arguing that we are essentially trying to patch millions of years of evolutionary status seeking using a bank account, which, doesn't work because our financial behaviors are driven by deeply ingrained scarcity mindsets and these unwinnable social games. The pursuit of money almost always acts more as an emotional liability than a liberator.
Okay, so to kick this off, I think we have to establish a fundamental distinction that kind of reorients how we even think about this topic. And it starts by drawing a bright, uncrossable line between being rich and being wealthy.
Which people conflate all the time.
Constantly. We constantly conflate these two words, but psychologically speaking, they are complete opposites. Being rich is entirely about current, visible income. It's the loud money.
The designer clothes, the massive mortgage.
Right, the first-class upgrades. It is money actively being converted into social signaling. Wealth, on the other hand, is completely silent. Wealth is what you do not see.
It's the restraint.
Exactly. It's the unspent options. By intentionally cultivating a gap between your ego and your income, you transition money from being a social signaling device into a protective moat. And the highest dividend that invisible wealth pays isn't luxury. It is the ability to actually control your own time.
I hear the elegance in that framework, I really do. But let's test that theory in the real world, because you're essentially asking people to perform a psychological miracle here.
A miracle? That's a bit strong.
Well, you are. You're asking them to live in modern society without absorbing any of its core messages. We are operated in a culture that is exceptionally good at doing two things simultaneously, generating massive amounts of wealth and generating massive amounts of envy.
Right.
You cannot just divorce the two by deciding to mentally rebrand yourself as wealthy instead of rich.
See, I disagree. I think profound self-awareness actually does allow you to divorce them. If you know what the money is for, which is autonomy, the envy loses its grip on you.
But here's where that breaks down for me. Our financial behaviors are almost never clean, rational choices made in a vacuum. They are deeply emotional coping mechanisms. If you are listening to this right now, think about how your parents talked about money at the kitchen table when you were like 7 years old.
Oh yeah, the tense whispers.
Exactly. Think about the physical knot in your stomach when you sense their stress over a utility bill. Much of our financial anxiety today is inherited from those unique childhood environments.
Sure, we carry that forward.
We do. So if you grew up in a household shadowed by economic fear, your intense desire to hoard money today isn't a rational pursuit of autonomy. It's a trauma response. You think you're buying freedom, but money has actually become this heavy anchor of your identity, not a sale.
I'm genuinely fascinated by that framing, but let me offer a different read on the root of that behavior. Because I think the psychological data actually firmly supports the idea that building a security buffer is a highly rational, emotionally healthy pursuit.
Okay, let's hear the data.
So, if we look at the psychological studies on human happiness, specifically the landmark work by psychologist Angus Campbell, the findings are incredibly revealing. Campbell spent years analyzing what makes Americans feel fulfilled, expecting to find that income levels or geography or education were the main drivers.
The usual suspects.
Right, but he found something else entirely. The most dependable predictor of positive well-being was a strong, visceral sense of controlling one's own life. It wasn't about what they owned at all.
It was about agency.
Yes, it was the psychological relief of waking up every morning and knowing I can do whatever I want today. Having a boring, invisible emergency fund provides that. It means you can handle a medical issue without spiraling into a panic attack. It means you can walk away from a toxic boss. That is not a trauma response. That is the rational, deliberate purchase of freedom.
I see the logic there. I do. However, the reality on the ground is that people rarely use money rationally to buy that freedom. Campbell's study is brilliant, but we have to embrace a concept here if we really want to understand the emotional side of money, which is no one is crazy.
Meaning what exactly? That every irrational decision has a rational origin?
Precisely. Every single financial decision a person makes perfect sense to them in that exact moment, based on, the specific economic conditions of their youth and their current environment. Let me give you a stark, deeply uncomfortable example of this.
Okay.
Look at the lowest income households in the United States. On average, they spend hundreds of dollars a year on lottery tickets. Now, from a purely rational mathematical standpoint, this seems completely absurd, right?
Yeah, mathematically, it's a terrible decision.
Right. These are often individuals who couldn't easily cover a $400 emergency, yet they are throwing that exact amount of money away on a statistical impossibility. But emotionally, psychologically, it is profoundly rational.
Rational how?
Imagine you are living paycheck to paycheck. You literally cannot afford the safety, the vacations, or the peace of mind that wealthier people just take for granted. Your prospects for significantly higher wages seem entirely out of reach. By buying a $5 lottery ticket, you aren't actually trying to win the math game.
You're buying the dream.
You are buying a tangible dream for 3 days, and to let drawing happens, you get to feel the emotional sensation of hope and possibility that wealthy people enjoy every single day. You are buying an emotional state, a temporary vacation from financial dread.
Well, I want to pause on that lottery example because it's incredibly poignant. You're saying that throwing money away on a statistical zero is actually an emotional purchase of hope.
Yes, because they are buying a feeling that they cannot access any other way. Math says save the $5. Psychology says this $5 is the only way I can buy a feeling of hope this week.
That was a very powerful way to look at it, but let me challenge the conclusion you're drawing from it.
Go ahead.
If we acknowledge that people act out of these ingrained emotional needs, if we admit that our parents passed down a scarcity mindset, or that we are instinctively driven to buy hope at a convenience store, isn't that self-awareness the exact key to unlocking our freedom?
How so?
Think of it like discovering the blueprint of a maze you have been trapped in your entire life. If you're wandering blindly, the maze controls you. You bounce off the walls, you react to every dead end. But once you look at the blueprint and say, my urge to oversave out of paranoia or to overspend on lottery tickets for a fleeting feeling of hope is just an inherited reflex, you suddenly have agency.
You think just seeing the blueprint is enough to escape?
It's the first mandatory step. You can logically separate your ego and your inherited fears from your income. You can say, I recognize why I want to buy this illusion of safety, but I am going to choose to systematically build actual safety instead. The awareness of the psychological trap is precisely what allows you to step out of it.
That is a beautiful metaphor. The blueprint of the maze. Truly. But have you considered how thoroughly modern society has sabotaged that blueprint?
Sabotaged it?
Completely. It is one thing to try and separate your ego from your income in a vacuum. It is quite another to do it when society has entirely blurred the lines between wealth and status.
Well,
we live in a hyper-connected, visually driven world that has created an infinite ceiling of social comparison. If you're listening to this right now, you're probably thinking, sure, it's easy to say don't compare yourself to others, but I have a device in my pocket that constantly bombards me with the curated highlights of everyone else's financial success.
But engaging in that comparison is still a choice. You can curate your feeds, you can redefine your peer group.
Can you though? Really? Let's explore the psychology of the man in the car paradox. Have you ever noticed what happens when someone drives a stunning $250,000 Ferrari down the street?
Sure, people stare at the car.
Exactly. They stare at the car. But here's the paradox. When you see that Ferrari, you rarely look at the driver and think, wow, that person is so cool and admirable. Instead, you look at the car and imagine yourself in the driver's seat.
Yeah, you project yourself into it.
Right. You think about how cool people would think you are if you were driving it. The tragic irony is that the person who bought the Ferrari did so believing it would bring them respect and admiration from others. others. But in reality, onlookers don't care about the driver at all.
They just use him as a prop.
Exactly. They are just using the driver's wealth as a benchmark for their own desires. We are all walking around using each other's status symbols as props in our own fantasies. And this status game is completely unwinnable because the goalposts never ever stop moving.
Unwinnable if you play it, which is exactly why you have to opt out.
But even the most brilliant, successful people in the world can't opt out. Let's look at a case like Rajat Gupta.
Oh, the McKinsey CEO?
Yes, this was a man who was the CEO of McKinsey. He sat on the boards of global powerhouses like Goldman Sachs and Procter & Gamble. He was deeply involved in high-level philanthropy. He was worth an estimated $100 million.
Which is incredible wealth.
Unimaginably vast resources. He had the ultimate autonomy you described earlier, yet he threw it all away. He risked prison, destroyed his legacy, and shattered his reputation to engage in insider trading.
Because of the social comparison.
Exactly. Why would someone with $100 million risk everything for a little more? Because his reference group had shifted. He wasn't comparing himself to normal people anymore. He was surrounded by billionaires. Compared to them, his $100 million felt inadequate. He had no internal sense of enough. The emotional liability of comparison literally destroyed his life.
I am so glad you brought up the Rajat Gupta story, actually, because while it is tragic, it perfectly reinforces my core position.
How does that reinforce your position?
Because Gupta didn't lack money. He lacked the internal boundary between his net worth and his self-worth. He was playing the exact unwinnable game you just described. This is exactly why defining wealth as what you don't see as a protective moat rather than a megaphone is the ultimate solution to the modern condition.
But how does making it invisible solve the psychological craving for respect?
By forcing you to realize that respect cannot be purchased. If an individual truly internalizes the man in the car paradox, if they realize that buying the Ferrari doesn't make people love them, it just makes people jealous, they can deliberately step off the comparison treadmill.
That's a huge if, though.
It takes work, yes. But by prioritizing invisible wealth, you are actively choosing to keep your lifestyle expectations static, even as your income grows. You stop using money to shout your status, and you start using it to build a thicker wall around your autonomy. When you stop trying to signal to other people, the money stops being a liability and becomes pure utility.
All right, let's say I concede that a remarkably self-aware person can miraculously opt out of the external status game. Let's say they somehow ignore the Ferraris and the billionaires.
Okay.
Here is where the ultimate trap lies. Even if you ignore everyone else, your own internal goalposts will sabotage you.
My own goalposts?
Yes, you talk about accumulating this invisible wealth to buy options for the future. But that assumes we have any idea what our future selves will actually want. There is a fascinating psychological phenomenon called the end of history illusion, researched extensively by psychologist Dan Gilbert.
Right. The idea that we think our current personality is our final finished form?
Exactly. The human brain does this funny, lazy thing. We are keenly aware of how much we have grown and changed in the past, right? Like we can easily remember who we were 10 years ago and laugh at how totally different we were.
Oh, for sure.
But imagining who we will be 10 years from now requires a massive cognitive load. So our brains just give up. We just assume that whoever we are today is the final version of ourselves. History has ended with our current identity.
Right, which is rarely true.
It's never true. Think about the devastating life trajectory this creates when mixed with money. A 5-year-old boy wants nothing more than to drive a tractor. He grows up, his desires change, and at 25, he decides he wants prestige. So he grinds to become a highly paid, incredibly stressed corporate lawyer. He structures his entire financial life, his mortgage, his lifestyle around this high-income identity.
And then what happens at 40?
At 40, he burns out. His values shift completely. He suddenly wants a flexible, low-stress job so he can spend time with his kids, but he can't. His massive mortgage and lifestyle inflation have trapped him in the life of the 25-year-old he used to be.
Yep.
Because we cannot accurately predict what our future selves will want, the rigid pursuit of financial independence based on today's desires often leads to enduring regrets rather than emotional peace. You're essentially saving money and making sacrifices for a stranger you haven't even met yet.
Wait, let me jump in here, because I think you just made my argument for me.
How so?
I think the end of history illusion is not an argument against accumulating wealth. I actually think it is the single strongest argument for it.
How can not knowing what you want want possibly be an argument for dedicating your life to accumulating resources?
Because our desires will inevitably shift. Because the tractor-obsessed child becomes the burned-out lawyer, and the burned-out lawyer becomes the exhausted parent longing for time.
Right.
If you spend everything you earn designing a life perfectly tailored to who you are today, you have absolutely zero flexibility when you inevitably wake up 5 years from now as a different person. Financial wealth, that hidden, boring reservoir of unspent assets, provides room for error.
So it's a shock absorber.
It is the ultimate shock absorber for human unpredictability. The money doesn't care what your identity is. It doesn't care if you want to be a lawyer or a stay-at-home parent. It simply sits there holding potential energy. It is precisely those unspent options that allow you to pivot your life without facing total ruin when your passions change. Wealth doesn't lock you into an identity. It is the only thing that lets you out of one.
But that requires a level of emotional detachment from the money that borders on the monastic. You're asking people to accumulate vast resources without attaching their ego to those resources, and without attaching specific future expectations to them either. You are asking them to hoard potential energy just for the sake of potential.
Yes, which is difficult but necessary.
But in reality, the act of hoarding that energy becomes an obsession itself. It becomes an identity. People don't just say, I have a lot of options. They say, I am a wealthy person. They check their portfolio every morning. They optimize every penny.
Some do, sure.
And once that happens, the fear of losing that status makes them paranoid. They become trapped by the very buffer they built to protect themselves. They spend their entire lives preparing for a future catastrophe that may never come, completely sacrificing the joy of the present moment.
Look, I won't deny that the path I am advocating for requires immense discipline, and frankly, a lot of humility. It is not easy to watch your peers buy the shiny things and choose to quietly hold your ground.
It goes against our nature.
It does, but let's summarize where this leaves us. My position is that while money is undeniably surrounded by emotional pitfalls and status traps, intentionally prioritizing hidden wealth over visible riches remains our most reliable buffer against the chaos of life. By actively keeping the ego in check and by explicitly defining wealth as the freedom to control your own time, money transitions from being a harsh master to being a quiet servant. It becomes a flexible tool that grants us the room for error we so desperately need to navigate our shifting desires.
And my perspective is that we must remain deeply, perhaps permanently, cautious. We are basically trying to reprogram millions of years of evolutionary status seeking using a spreadsheet, and it is bound to be messy.
Very messy. Our relationship with money is heavily burdened by generational fears, an instinctual drive for social comparison, and the pervasive illusion that earning just a little more will finally make us feel complete. If we treat money purely as a rational tool, we completely ignore the profound psychological gravity it exerts on our decision-making, our self-worth, and our relationships.
I think where we fundamentally agree is that money is ultimately a magnifying glass for human behavior. It amplifies our insecurities, our generosity, our fears, and our ego. True financial maturity isn't about memorizing technical formulas or, mastering the stock market. It is about deeply understanding oneself.
Completely agreed. It is an exercise in applied psychology. If you don't understand your own emotional triggers, like if you don't know why you are so afraid to spend or why you are so desperate to buy something flashy, no amount of compound interest is going to save you from your own self-sabotage.
Right. We have to be willing to look closely at those invisible forces. We have to examine the knot in our stomach from childhood, the evolutionary urge to outshine our neighbors, and our fear of the unknown future. Only when we drag those emotions into the light can we begin to decide for ourselves what our own personal definition of enough truly looks like.
Well said, because a life built on unexamined ego will always feel like a prison, no matter how much money is sitting in the bank.
Thank you all for joining our discussion. May you find your own enough.